Hi there, this is Robert DeBard. Today I'm going to show you very quickly how to take a 2D image out of Fusion 360 and send it to the Dremel LC-40 laser cutter. So, of course, it'll start with, you'll have to have something like this in Fusion 360. You'll notice that it's just a flat thing of uniform thickness. It has holes that go all the way through, as well as some engraving. So this is a perfect kind of item you might want to laser cut. So what you need to do is you go to New Drawing here under the File menu, New Drawing, from Design. And then, provided it's small enough, you can leave the sheet size here. If you have something really large, you might need to change your sheet size. But the default sheet size should be fine. And you say OK. And it takes Fusion 360 just a moment to set this up. But what it does is it opens a new tab here with this ability to bring in different views of your part and drop them wherever you want to. Now, looking here, you can see this is a front view. That's not the view I want. I'm going to change this to top view. Now I can see the view I want, but you'll notice the scale is 1 to 2. We need it to be 1 to 1, so we get our life-size object. I'm going to move it into this upper left-hand corner. I don't believe it makes any difference, but I like to put it there. But make sure it's not overlapping any of those other items. Click once to drop it in place and say OK. By the way, the preview will be a little bit chunky, not as accurate as the actual file that it makes. So don't worry if it's not beautiful here. Now, what we don't want to do is we don't want to laser cut this outer perimeter or this information box. So we got to turn that off. We do that here under Sheet Settings. Click this down arrow, and you just turn off the visibility of those two items. So those will not be part of the PDF file that we're going to send to the laser cutter. The laser cutter accepts PDF files. And so our goal here is to export a PDF file. One other thing is that the line widths on here do affect the accuracy of the laser cutter. And in fact, I've had to go back if I want something to be exactly right and even change the dimensions in my Fusion 360 project so that those lines don't end up messing up my dimensions slightly. One thing you can do to ameliorate that problem is here under Document Settings. It doesn't eliminate it, but it makes it less bad. Under Document Settings, you click this down arrow, and you can kind of hover on any of these guys, and if you click on the thing that pops up there, just a single left click, it opens up this dialog box. There's a lot of stuff in this dialog box, but the one we're looking for here is the line width group. You can choose very thin. And in fact, it may be possible, though I'm not sure how, to actually go in and change the line width here. But I think they're pre-existing in groups. You can't actually change that. So you want to do the very thin line width group and say OK. Now, it doesn't make any visible difference here, but I think it does make a difference when you send it to the laser cutter. So now we need to export this as a PDF. And up here in the top right-hand corner, there's Output PDF. You just click that and agree to it. Now, it's going to try to save this PDF somewhere. Be sure you're paying attention to where you're saving it. I'm actually just going to save it in my download file if it's easy enough to do that. And you got to give it a name, and so I'm going to call this Cool Wheel and save that. So now I've got that saved as a PDF, and it's ready to go to my laser cutter. Except, here's an issue. I don't want it to cut the word Cool Wheel all the way through. So I actually need two versions of this file. This version would be the one to engrave with, and then another version would be the one to actually cut with. So I really only have this one file right now. I need to actually go back and change this model so that it does not have the most recent feature in it. At one point, I was under the impression that you could turn on and off the sketch and make that work, but that is not consistent. It's better to go in and just make another one. So I'm going to close this drawing. It's going to ask if I want to save it. There's no reason to save it because I saved the PDF, which is all I need. And now I'm going to go back into here, and I'm going to roll back the engraving here. So now I have just the items I want to cut. I will then repeat the process of making a drawing from this design. Because I suppressed by rolling back the two features and sketches necessary for the engraving, those will no longer appear. I'm going to back up into the corner here. Notice I changed it to top and 1-to-1 like I did before. I say OK. I change my sheet settings so that I hide the border and the information block. I change my document settings by clicking on this to very thin line width. Say OK. And then I can output this as a PDF. This one, I'm going to give it the same name, but then I'm going to add the word cut only. Click Save. So now I have two files, the same object, and the same scale, with the same line width. They're absolutely identical, except for one of them, I've suppressed the engraving, and the other one, I left with all of the engraving showing. So two different files. I can actually close this. Again, I don't need to save this because I saved the PDF already. So I don't need the Fusion drawing. And I'm actually done with Fusion now. I'm going to minimize it, but I could close it. Now, to get that into the laser cutter, our laser cutter here at Ransom has the web address of 172.16.2.61. And so as long as I'm on the Ransom network, if I type that in, it will actually connect me with the LC-40 that we have over there. And so then over here, I go Import File. And then you click here to choose your file that you're going to do. And I'm going to bring in the engrave file first, like this. Click that. Click Open. Now here, this is very important. This one, because it's the engraving file, I'm going to import engrave only and continue. So that comes up. I can say OK. I'm actually going to move this over here in some random spot for now, and I'll explain why shortly. Then I'm going to go in and import the other file. This time it's going to be the cut file. And I'm going to change this to import cut only and continue. Now, this one, I'm going to click on it, and down here under Properties, I'm going to change its position to be 1 inch, and here, also one, so I hit a 0 there, I think. That one should be 1, this one should also be 1. 1 inch down and 1 inch over. The reason I have to do 1 inch is because I am going to be doing some engraving, and it cannot engrave right at the edges. If you're trying to save some material in your laser cutter, you can physically move the material, so it's about 1 inch over and 1 inch down from where the laser is sitting at 0, 0. But if you want to put your material all the way up in the corner, it'll just start cutting about 1 inch over and 1 inch down for the boundaries of this thing. Anyway, I go to the next one, and I have to put in the exact same location. So 1 inch over, and, it again. 1 inch over, and, come on, there we go, 1 inch down. What this does is it places them precisely on top of each other. One other thing you should check, by the way, is you should check the scale, make sure they're 100%, but they should do that by default. And so the other default settings, like how the engrave settings in here, those things will all be set by the material you choose. We're actually using 1/8 inch acrylic. So I have to go to the acrylic and 1/8 there to choose my material. And these numbers generally are pretty good in the software, so we don't have to make any changes there. Now, at this point, I realized I forgot to mention something. Not only do you have to be in the same network as your laser cutter. But your laser cutter actually has to be turned on for this software to launch. So part of the noise you might hear in the background, this air blowing sound, is our laser cutter. It's turned on already. So my laser cutter was turned on before I even launched this in the browser. So now when I click start, it sets up and it says execution order. Now this is important. Make sure that it's set up so that your engraving occurs before your cutting. That's one of the reasons I gave this file the cut name, so I knew it would cut after it engraved. If you do it in the opposite order, it might not engrave right because after it cuts, the part shifts a little bit as it falls down and separates from the rest of the material. And so if you want to make sure your engraving happens in exactly the right location, you want to engrave before you cut. Anyway, I'll let you know as I send to cutter, and everything else that happens here happens at the laser cutter. So I would go over to the laser cutter, I'd set up my material, I'd zero the, or not zero, but focus the laser. I would close the lid, and I would start the process of laser cutting this. I'm not going to do that now, and in fact, I would encourage students of mine to let me be physically present when they first do this so that they know what they're doing. If you are away from the laser cutter, you can still do all the work we did in Fusion 360 up to the point that I went to this browser and started the Dremel software. You can do all of that, and then you're prepared to just bring it in, bring in the cut and the engrave and locate them in this software before you go. So that's basically how to get the images out of Fusion 360 for laser cutting in a nutshell. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to working with you in the future on that.